In this lecture, we're going to be looking at our first modifier. We're going to start with the mirror modifier. We can use the mirror modifier for objects that have at least one line of symmetry, so that we can halve our workload. We're also going to look at how clipping affects the mirror modifier before giving you a couple of challenges. So let's go into Blender. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a line of symmetry in my cube. Now obviously there is a line of symmetry, but we need to tell Blender where that line of symmetry is. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into edit mode, and we're going to press Ctrl and R, and we're going to make a loop cut. So there's our loop cut. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to press 7 for a top perspective view. Deselect everything. We are then going to make sure that our selection is not limited to visible. So now we can see our entire mesh and all of its vertices. We're now going to press B to bring up box select. Select this half of vertices, so 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to press X and delete vertices. So what we've done is we've deleted half of our cube. Now what we're going to do is we're going to recreate this half of our cube by dragging out the properties panel. And this is where we're going to introduce the modifier tab, which is this tool icon here. Note that the modifier tab is empty because we currently have no modifiers. To add a modifier, we must click on add modifier, and we have all of these modifiers to choose from. What we want is the mirror modifier, so we're going to left click, and nothing's happened so far, and the reason why is because we have to make sure the axes are correct. If we pan around, we can see that nothing has happened, but if we tick our Y axis, we can see that we now have our full cube. We don't need the X axis in this case. So we now have a mirror. Now one thing to note about using the mirror modifier is it's best to avoid applying your modifier until the last possible moment, because you want to be able to edit it. What will happen is once you apply that modifier, then your entire mesh will be available for edit. Now that sounds okay, but the whole point of having the mirror modifier is actually so that you can edit two sides of an object at the same time. For example, I'm going to select this vertice and I'm going to drag it up. Watch what happens to the mirrored half of my cube. Said drag up, and we can see that the opposite vertex has also been manipulated in the same way. The same applies to just about anything. If I insert a couple of loop cuts and then scale out those loop cuts, we can see that it impacts the mirror side as well. However, we notice that as we scale in, a hole appears in our mesh. If we scale too far out, we end up, if I just confirm that for a second, with geometry crossing over each other, and we don't want that. In order to avoid this, we have to enable the clipping option, which clips at the center of the mirror. So I'm going to press Ctrl and Z. I'm going to tick clipping, and now I'm going to scale again. If we scale in, we can see that it is nice and tight. Scaling out, almost the same. Now we have one problem here. As we scale out, the clipping doesn't seem to be working. So we need to make sure that that is working. So we're going to undo. The reason why it's not working is actually very simple. Even though we have clipping engaged, as we clip smaller, we have it nice and tight, but as it comes out, it seems to almost disconnect from the clip. And the reason why that happens is very simple. We can't scale out with the clipping always applied. Blender doesn't really allow this very well, because if you're clipped and it's preventing you from scaling, then you can't scale. So scaling takes priority. So just bear that in mind. It's sometimes better anyway to make sure that you've scaled, rotated and moved your object before applying any modifiers. So that's my number one tip. Before you apply any modifiers, make sure that your object's location, rotation and scale are what you want them to be. So that's the mirror modifier, guys. Now we're happy with that. We're going to press apply. Here's another thing. Modifiers cannot be applied in edit mode. This is because they are still being used. So we have to go into object mode by pressing the tab key and then click apply. Now when we go into the edit mode, our entire mesh is available for edit. This time, however, if we click on this vertex, its opposite vertex is not moving in the same way. In fact, it's not moving at all. So the mirror modifier only really affects both sides of a mesh before the modifier is actually applied. So I've now got a challenge for you. I want you to create a custom object with the mirror modifier. Create 4 or 5. Use the primitive meshes if you have to. Take each primitive mesh, create a line of symmetry using the loop cut and slide tool. Delete one half of your mesh. Make sure you don't delete the center points. And then I want you to apply a mirror modifier and then customize your object while using the mirror modifier, and then I want you to apply it. Once you're confident enough with that, I want you to step it up a gear. Quite literally, I want you to try and create a very basic car model. It doesn't have to look brilliant at all, but use things like moving your vertices about, extrusions, scaling, rotation, all the things you've learned so far. Try and use them. Use joining methods to try and create wheels and join them to your mesh before using that mirror modifier. Okay guys, do that now. Post all of your creations in the discussion so that we can all see, and I will see you in the next lecture.